Everyone's like, what is going on with the refs? And I'm like, I don't know. And you finding me $500 is not going to do.
This is the kind of pushback Caitlin Clark's fans had been begging to see from her teammates, and in Sophie Cunningham they got far more than they ever expected. Because Sophie wasn't just Caitlin's enforcer, she became every fan's loudest voice and Kathy Angelber's biggest headache. And as the 2025 season progressed, it was impossible not to notice that Sophie's tolerance for the league's nonsense had dropped to zero. Every hard foul on Caitlin, every cheap shot the referees ignored, every fine the league threw at her. None of it silenced Sophie. Instead, she doubled down on the referees, on the media, on her old teammates, even on the league itself. Nobody was off limits. And here's the part that should terrify the WNBA. This was only the beginning, because what we were witnessing was the evolution of a role player into a fearless storm, and the video evidence backed it all up, showing how every moment she played grew more defiant and satisfying, and the fans who had waited so long for someone to finally defend Caitlin were living for it. Sophie herself had once said she was just a fierce, sassy competitor who stuck up for her teammates and herself, but that proved to be the understatement of the season. Because when she joined the Fever, fans were already hyped. This team needed toughness and deterrence against the non-stop cheap shots aimed at Caitlin. Yet Sophie brought more than just fire. She brought loyalty, a kind that was undeniable, and in a league where loyalty often took a back seat to politics, it was refreshing to hear her say with no hesitation that Caitlin had changed the game in the best possible way, in every way, and that honesty instantly made her a target, public enemy number one. Because in the WNBA's strange dynamic, telling the truth about Caitlin Clark seemed like the most dangerous thing a player could do, and it didn't take long. Before other players started testing her resolve, in the preseason against the Mystics, rookie Kiki Fenn took her down with a little extra shove. And Sophie popped right up, got in her face, and basically told her never to try that again. And while that moment might have seemed small, it was actually the appetizer for what was to come. Because if rookies felt free to try that against veterans, like Sophie, then Caitlin Clark, still early in her career, had no chance of being spared. It was open season on the Fever, and Sophie's role as the protector was about to become crystal clear. Game after game, the referees kept their whistles, buried in their pockets. Caitlin was hammered with no calls while other players got away with flagrant shots. It felt like déjà vu of the 2024 season. And finally, Sophie had enough on June 17th in the Commissioner's Cup against the Connecticut Sun. Officials let the game spiral out of control. First, J.C. Sheldon swiped at Caitlin's eyes. Then Marina Mabrey leveled her with a body shot. No ejections, no protection, no accountability, and that was the breaking point. That was when Sophie Cunningham snapped and delivered a response that instantly became legendary among Caitlin Clark. Fans, a headlock, a shove, a dare that screamed, "Do something," and in that single act, Sophie flipped the switch, because up until that point she had always been fiery. But this was different. This was raw fury backed with intent, and from then on she played with zero fear and zero F's to give, and it didn't stop there. Because at practice, when reporters asked about the altercation, Sophie made it clear this wasn't about one foul or one game. It was about years of officials refusing to protect the star player of the WNBA, and she said flat out she would protect her teammates, period, and that kind of loyalty instantly cemented her status. Suddenly, Sophie Cunningham wasn't just a player. She was a household name. Her defenders reminded everyone she had been a black belt since childhood. Her viral moment defending Caitlin turned her jersey into a bestseller that sold out in minutes. Her social media exploded, and then she leaned into the attention with a perfectly timed TikTok set to a Selena Gomez track, a wink to the J.C. Sheldon takedown, which went mega viral, and the comments flooded in with one message: "Thank you for standing up for Caitlin." And in that moment, Sophie became more than a role player. She became a movement. She became proof that defending Caitlin was not only right, but profitable. Yet with every fan came more enemies. The media slammed her for retaliation while ignoring the cheap shots Caitlyn had taken. Petitions appeared calling for her to be kicked out of the league, and then the WNBA fined her $400. But instead of silencing her, it only fueled her because Sophie was at a crossroads. She could have stayed quiet, let the heat die down, faded back into being just another scrappy role player, but she didn't. She chose war. And the proof came just 5 days later when Sophie showed up pre-game in a Barstool Sports Tres Leches shirt featuring herself, Caitlyn, and Lexi Hull. A move that stood as a bold declaration of where her loyalty was, shoulder to shoulder with Caitlyn, and that symbolism infuriated corners of the WNBA because Tres Leches, 3 milks, was interpreted as a reference to the Fever's 3 white players. Sophie knew exactly what it would mean, and she wore it anyway, because she wasn't afraid of optics or outrage. She was here to send a message, and that message was clear. Caitlin Clark wasn't alone anymore. Sophie was with her, and anyone who didn't like it would just have to deal with it. And she wasn't done, because less than 2 weeks later, she took direct aim at the league itself, blasting its expansion plans, dismissing Detroit and Cleveland, sparking a frenzy, taking criticism from every corner of media and fans, briefly trying to walk it back before deciding to double down, admitting she had said the quiet part out loud and that everyone in the league secretly agreed with her. They just lacked the guts to say it. And that moment showed the new Sophie Cunningham in full, a player no longer playing just basketball, but waging war with words and actions, unapologetic, unfiltered, and completely unafraid. And this is where part 1 ends, with Sophie, already fined, already targeted, but already bigger than the WNBA had ever planned, standing on the edge of turning into the league's worst nightmare. Because once Sophie launched her new podcast, Show Me Something, the league had no idea what kind of firestorm it was about to unleash. From the very first episode, she didn't hold back. She went straight at the league, calling out the abuse Caitlin Clark was taking, saying openly that even back when she wasn't Caitlyn's teammate in Phoenix, locker rooms across the WNBA were plotting to toughen her up, prove a point, show her what the league really was. But after joining Indiana and seeing it firsthand, Sophie admitted it was just too much targeting, too much cheapness. And she said if she was saying it was too much, then everyone should know it had crossed the line. And in that moment, fans realized Sophie was doing what no one else had dared. She was saying out loud what everyone was thinking. And that set the tone for the rest of her season, because suddenly no one was safe. She didn't just call out opponents. She called out referees, old teammates, even the owners, essentially daring the league to fine her, and sure enough they did. First, a $500 fine for a TikTok lip-sync mocking refs, then a $1,500 fine for comments on her very first podcast episode. But instead of silencing her, every fine became fuel. And the irony was that the league's punishment system was built for ordinary players, but Sophie had endorsement money pouring in, so those fines were laughable. In fact, Caitlin Clark could probably pay them off with a single Instagram post, and fans joked that the league was basically paying Sophie to talk louder, because every time they fined her, she came back sharper, bolder, more unapologetic, and then came the Phoenix Mercury moment. Her old team, her old mentor, Diana Taurasi, her old connections, and Sophie went right at it, criticizing Dana Bonner's exit from Indiana, calling it ugly, saying if you leave, you should expect some bite back. And those words hit hard. Phoenix wasn't happy, the fans weren't happy, but Sophie didn't flinch, because in her world, loyalty meant everything. And Phoenix had disrespected Caitlin and disrespected Indiana. So she let them know they were dead to her, plain and simple, and it was clear she was burning bridges on purpose because she didn't need safety nets anymore. She had the fans, and with Caitlin's fan base behind her, she had something bigger than any team could give her. And then in August, she went for one of the biggest taboos in the WNBA, Paige Bueckers, the rookie phenom, the golden girl who was suddenly getting superstar treatment. Sophie said it outright, Paige was being handed every call. You couldn't touch her. The refs gave her whistles Caitlyn had never received even after 2 years in the league. And fans knew exactly what Sophie meant. They had been watching the double standard for months. Caitlyn hacked, bruised, bloodied with no calls, Paige treated like royalty, and when Sophie said it out loud, fans exploded in agreement, while the league slapped her with yet another fine. 3 for 3, every podcast episode another fine, and yet each one only gave her more credibility because she had become the living embodiment of the frustration fans had with the WNBA. She wasn't polished, she wasn't playing PR games, she wasn't trying to please the establishment. She was holding up a mirror and daring them to look at what they'd created. A league that refused to protect its biggest draw and then acted shocked when someone finally said enough. And even when an MCL injury sidelined Sophie for the rest of the 2025 season, her platform didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. Because now, she had all the time in the world to talk, to post, to record. And fans flocked to her because she had proven with actions, not just words, that she would defend Caitlyn Clark. On the court with headlocks and shoves, off the court with brutal honesty. And that combination was lethal to the league's carefully built image, because Sophie wasn't anti-basketball, she was pro-women's basketball, but she wasn't pro-WNBA. She wasn't here to polish the brand, she was here to challenge it. And that distinction made her dangerous because the WNBA could fine her, suspend her, ignore her, but they couldn't erase her connection with the fans. Every viral TikTok, every podcast rant, every clip of her throwing herself into a fight for Caitlyn only deepened that bond. And as the fines kept coming, fans saw them as badges of honor. Proof that Sophie was striking nerves, proof that she was over the target, and proof that the league was afraid of her. And so Sophie became exactly what the WNBA never wanted, but could no longer control. A charismatic player casual fans actually loved. One who defended Caitlyn Clark at every turn and called out hypocrisy with zero fear. And the truth is, the league brought this nightmare on themselves. If they had protected Caitlyn from the beginning, if they had recognized her value, without hesitation, if they had allowed someone like Sophie to thrive without punishment, then maybe Sophie would have stayed a scrappy role player. But they didn't. And now she was a bullhorn, a rallying cry, and a thorn in their side, because as long as Caitlyn Clark remains the face of the league, Sophie Cunningham will remain her protector, her enforcer, and her voice. And that means every slight, every cheap shot, every missed whistle will be amplified through Sophie's unapologetic defiance, making her not just a teammate, but a movement. And that is why the WNBA fears her, because she has nothing to lose and everything to say. And until the league learns to protect its stars and respect its fans, Sophie will keep getting louder, fines or no fines, suspension or no suspension, injury or no injury. And that is the terrifying reality. Sophie Cunningham is not going away. She is only getting started. And the nightmare for the WNBA has only just begun. So if you're still here, drop a trophy emoji in the comments because you know exactly what this means. You're watching history unfold. The rise of Sophie Cunningham from role player to legend, from Caitlyn's enforcer to the WNBA's worst nightmare. And the louder they try to silence her, the more unstoppable she becomes.